In a moment of crisis, we are trained to trust the system. We follow the protocols, listen to the authorities, and obey the orders given by those in control because we believe the system is designed to save us. But what happens when the system is wrong? What happens when a lifetime of experience tells you that following the order is a death sentence? This is the story of a pilot who, in the most critical 208 seconds of his life, with 155 souls in his hands, was faced with an impossible choice. Trust the order from the ground or trust himself. He chose to ignore the order. January 15, 2009. A bitterly cold winter day in New York City. At LaGuardia Airport, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 was preparing for a routine flight to Charlotte, North Carolina. In the cockpit sat two highly competent men. In the left seat, Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, a 57-year-old former fighter pilot with over 40 years and 20,000 hours of flying experience. He was a master of his craft, an expert in aviation safety. In the right seat, First Officer Jeff Skiles, also an experienced pilot, though he was new to flying this particular aircraft. The Airbus A320, the 150 passengers and 3 flight attendants settled in, the cabin buzzing with the quiet energy of people heading home or on to their next destination. It was, in every sense, just another flight. At 3:25 p.m., the tower cleared them for takeoff. The Airbus roared to life, lifting gracefully into the hazy New York sky. The ascent was smooth, everything perfectly normal. Skiles was at the controls for this leg of the journey. Below them, the familiar landscape of the Bronx unfolded. For the passengers, it was a moment to relax, to look out the window at the city shrinking beneath them. For the pilots, it was the most critical phase of any flight. They had been in the air for less than 2 minutes, climbing through 3,000 feet, when Captain Sullenberger, looking out his window, saw it, a dark, fast-moving formation that didn't belong. It wasn't another plane. It was a flock of Canada geese. He had just enough time to say birds before the impact. The sound was horrific. A series of loud, violent thuds, like hail hitting a car, followed by the sickening smell of burning birds being ingested by the engines. And then, the most terrifying sound a pilot can ever hear, silence. The roar of the 2 massive engines died, replaced by an eerie, unnatural quiet. Both engines had failed. The plane, now weighing over 75 tons, was a glider. They were falling. In the cockpit, there was no panic, only focused, disciplined action. Sully's decades of training immediately took control of the aircraft, his hands steady on the side stick. His first words to Skiles were calm, professional. "My aircraft." Skiles responded instantly, "Your aircraft." While Sully focused on flying the now powerless plane, Skiles began working through the emergency checklist, a 3-page procedure for restarting the engines. Sully keyed the mic to air traffic control. His voice, recorded for posterity, was a testament to grace under pressure. It was completely calm, without a hint of panic. "This is Cactus 1549. Hit birds. We've lost thrust in both engines. We're turning back towards LaGuardia." On the ground, in the control tower, air traffic controller Patrick Harton's heart stopped. A dual-engine failure on a plane that had just taken off over the most densely populated city in America was the ultimate nightmare scenario. He immediately sprang into action, his voice now a lifeline. "Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left, heading of 2-0. He cleared the runways, ordered other planes out of the way. He was executing his plan. The system was working, but in the air, Sully was doing a different kind of math, the math of a pilot, not a controller. He could see the airport, but he could also feel the plane. He felt its energy, its momentum, and he knew it was dying. The plane was too low, too slow, and losing altitude too fast. Turning back to LaGuardia was a beautiful idea on paper, but in the air, it was an impossibility. It would mean flying over dense neighborhoods, and if they fell short, the result would be a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. Harton on the ground offered him runway 13, Cactus 1549. "If we can get you to it, runway 13 is available." Sully's response was chilling in its simplicity, unable. Inside the cabin, the passengers knew something was terribly wrong. The silence of the engines, the smell of smoke, and the gentle downward glide of the plane created a terrifying atmosphere. The flight attendants, trained for this moment, moved through the cabin, their voices firm but calm. And then came the captain's voice over the intercom, not with an explanation, but with a simple, terrifying command: brace for impact. In that moment, people prayed. They texted loved ones. They held hands with strangers. They prepared for the end. If LaGuardia was impossible, there was another option: Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Cactus, 1549. Teterboro Airport is 2 o'clock and 7 miles. For a moment, it seemed like a viable alternative. But Sully, looking out his window, again made a calculation. He saw the buildings, the distance. He knew. Another beautiful idea that would end in disaster. This was the moment. The system, in the form of a dedicated and skilled air traffic controller, was offering him every logical by-the-book solution. And Sully, with the lives of 155 people in his hands, had to make a choice. Follow the order, trust the system that had guided pilots for decades, or trust his own for decades of experience, his gut, his intimate understanding of the physics of his dying aircraft. His response changed aviation history. He keyed the mic one last time. His voice was still impossibly calm. He didn't ask for permission. He made a declaration. We can't do it. We're going to be in the Hudson. In the control tower, Patrick Harton felt a wave of despair. The Hudson River. It wasn't a runway. It was a death sentence. No large passenger jet had ever successfully landed on water without breaking apart and killing most on board. He thought he had just sent 155 people to their graves. He had lost them. But Sully saw something different. He saw a runway. A long, flat, clear runway. It was his only option. He lined up the plane, flying south down the river, passing over the George Washington Bridge with just 900 feet to spare. He had to land it perfectly. Wings level, nose slightly up, hitting the water at the lowest possible speed, but not so slow as to stall. It was a maneuver of incredible precision, one he had never practiced, one that existed only in theory. At 3:31 p.m., just 208 seconds after the bird strike, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 hit the Hudson River. The impact was violent, a deafening crash as the water slammed against the fuselage. But the plane didn't break apart. Sully had done it. It floated. Immediately, the crew's training took over. The flight attendants yelled their commands. Evacuate! Evacuate! Passengers, shocked but alive, moved towards the emergency exits. They opened the doors, and the cold January air rushed in. They inflated the slides, which also function as rafts, and began climbing out onto the wings of the floating plane. The sight was surreal. A commercial airliner sitting in the middle of the Hudson River with passengers standing on its wings. But this was New York City. Within minutes, a flotilla of ferries and emergency boats converged on the plane. The city's first responders, in a remarkable display of skill and speed, began pulling people from the wings and the rafts. It was a rescue as miraculous as the landing itself. In the end, every single one of the 155 people on board survived. Captain Sully, after making sure every passenger was off, was the last one to leave his aircraft. The story of the pilot who ignored the order and chose the river became a global symbol of heroism, a shining example of how, in the most extreme moments, human judgment born from a lifetime of experience can be more powerful than any protocol.